Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video, where today I'm going to be talking about the finale to The War Between the Land and the Sea. And I've already seen some reactions to this episode, so I think I'm going to be in the minority when I say this. But I actually quite liked this as a finale to this show. For my money, it's the best finale that Russell has written since coming back, which I will grant is not a high bar. However, I think that this was probably the best way that you could end a show like this. I want to go into a bit more detail about that, but I want to give you kind of my thoughts as we go through. So subscribe if you're new, that'd be greatly appreciated. We're actually going to have a live subscriber counter on screen, so if it goes up during the recording, then it goes up. But yeah, subscribe if you're new, that'd be greatly appreciated. And let's dive right in, literally. So obviously it opens up with this really fun little opening sequence of a bunch of people walking their dogs, and then it's revealed that the Sea Devils are trying to herd them in because they want to eat the dogs. So that was what Russell meant by woof. Which, I mean, to be fair, I've seen a lot of people online backing Homo Aqua, backing the Sea Devils. If there was anything to make people waver in that, it would be them deciding to eat the dogs. And you do get a joke about, I think it's Vietnam in there, which I was like, okay, interesting joke there. So it opens with that, but obviously the core of this plot is essentially Barclay is going through it. Quite understandably, he's been in a insane state for the last couple of weeks. And yeah, that makes total sense to me. But basically, every so often, he sneaks off into the ocean to look out for salt. But it's revealed that there are actually people who are aware that he's doing this and are deliberately setting him up to do this. And it's the American general man and the French woman who are basically putting him up to this to basically have him sneak out to meet her. But every time he tries, he gets nothing back because of the signals blocking the oceans by the French. And obviously they're on the English Channel. So they stop the signals. Barclay and Salt eventually meet up. But before they do, the people who are kind of undercover plant something into him. They inject something into him. And I'm guessing, obviously they don't say this outright, but I think the pretty firm implication of this is that what they inject into him is severance. Severance being the contingency plan of the humans and of the government to basically kill off Homo Aqua when things go too far, which is exactly what they do. They kill off all of Homo Aqua, or at least like 9 in 10 of Homo Aqua, and essentially condemn them to what is effectively a water reservation. So you've got that element of it. I loved that that's what the humans did, because it reminded me very much of Children of Earth in a good way, where the humans are the villain. Like, they've always kind of been in this show, but more so in this, like, they are objectively just the villains of this story. So yeah, basically the people enact severance, a bunch of them come up dead, and Homo Aqua are forced onto what is basically a reservation. And then something, like, slightly weirder happens. We get, like, We Can Be Heroes, the song at the end, and then obviously it gets revealed that there's another thing in the episode called Accord. Now, Accord is something that Salt wants to set up with Barclay and with the humans as kind of a last resort. So they send this message out to Homo Aqua, but they don't get a reply because, of course, before they can set up Accord, they end up dead. What Accord was meant to be, according to Salt, is a binding between the two species, a union of the species, a celebration of the species. And it's revealed, I think, essentially that Barclay becomes the Accord. He becomes the thing in the middle. He becomes like this fish-human hybrid. I think that was the weirdest aspect for me. Not sure how I felt about that. I thought all the stuff in the build-up to that, the humans activating severance and like the explanation for what severance is, that worked really well for me. I thought the emotion of that. I thought Kate actually was really interesting in this. They are setting up Kate to be borderline villainous, and I'm wondering if that's going to get continued to be pushed, because obviously she has that bit with her therapist where her therapist says, look, I can't have you on this job. You're hallucinating your ex. I can't have you running this operation. And she essentially goes, well, I know about your your little fling and you don't want your husband to find out. It basically blackmails her into, letting her stay on. So Kate is borderline becoming villainous at this point, and I would have liked to have seen someone maybe, I don't know, address that. Like, obviously, you get the post-credit scene, and that's another thing that I've seen of kind of note that's been immediately controversial is the end credit scene, which Russell spent ages hyping up, is basically just a gag where Kate basically tells a guy, pick up your rubbish off of the beach, and basically forces him at gunpoint to do it. Which I'll admit is funny, and it does, like, have relevance to, like, the message of the show. But, like, did that need, like, several interviews saying, oh, watch to the very, very end, everybody? Again, it feels very similar to sort of things we've had in the past, where it's like, why you gotta blue ball us like this? I mean, in all fairness, I saw so many theories and bits of speculation saying, oh, is Barclay gonna be the master? And I said from day one, like, I said from day one, I don't think that would be good for this show. I don't think that's what this show was meant to be. And I'm not mad that, like, it doesn't tie into Doctor Who enough, because I've seen a lot of other people saying, oh, why isn't there a Doctor cameo? For me, I think it works better that there isn't one. I would also make the point that they do reference him again. Kate says, I can save humanity, but I cannot shape humanity, which I think is a good sort of line there, and it kind of explains why the Doctor doesn't get involved in these things. However, at the same time, like, obviously, I can understand why some people would want it, but I just don't think that was ever what this show was going for, and I'm kind of glad that they didn't veer into fan service, because that's something I was really worried about. They didn't do, like a Deus Ex Machina thing either, really. Obviously, they do the virus that kills most of the Sea Devils off, but Severance has been being talked about since like, episode 2. So that felt to me like it was natural. Obviously, you get the scene as well with Kate confronting the Prime Minister about Severance, and he denies it. And then Salt basically says, to all of you who did this, you may think that you were smart because viruses don't contain water, but it does ride the water, and we can read the water, and eventually water will find out what happened. And then the people who were responsible will get, like, visions of them all being basically suffocated by the water, which I thought was a really cool visual. I thought that was really, really good, really, really interesting. Obviously, you get some scenes with the family towards the beginning where he meets up with them, following up from the fact that they basically sold him out. I still think, I think the mum is kind of weirdly portrayed in this, because it's like, on one level, she obviously is not sympathetic to her at all, but in the end, she sort of is anyway, and there isn't really a explanation for that about change of heart, in my opinion. It kind of just feels a bit, she's going to be antagonistic towards you in this scene, and then be really angry at you at this scene, and then the next scene, she's going to be comforting you because you're breaking down. And I just kind of felt that that character was kind of, like, underdeveloped, and, like, obviously it's a shame because I quite liked the idea of that family conceptually, because obviously that is something that Russell has historically done very well. But I did get the feeling that, like, obviously the mum rats him out, or at least the child rats them out, but I think obviously the child would have been acting under the mum, so I don't really blame the child for it much. But, like, the mum basically rats him out, but then, like, doesn't even say, like, a sorry, or, like, I didn't know what else to do. It was just, oh, are we gonna die? And I kind of thought, surely if they are on somewhat good terms to the point where she would comfort him, she would say, I did what I had to do for Kirby, for our child. I don't know, I thought that was a little bit odd, like, the fact that the mum just kind of goes along with it, I guess. And obviously, I have seen some people saying that he abandons his family to go and be with Salt at the end, which is not the implication that I got. Obviously, I know there is that scene at the end of, like, the montage with We Could Be Heroes where they're crying with each other before he goes into the sea, but I took that more to be because he's telling them that he was the reason they all died, because they all died because of that injection. And when, my assumption is, when Salt and Barclay kissed, that spread basically like a pathogen, like a virus, to all of the rest of them. I feel like, though, it would have made more sense if, like, either Salt or Barclay had died as the result of that, as the people it came from, but I don't know. Maybe that's expecting it to go a bit too dark. But I kind of thought, oh, maybe they're going to do like a Romeo and Juliet thing where this sort of poison that Barclay ingests means that one of them has to die as a result. But they don't. They do want to give those two a happy ending, which, to be fair, after you've killed off about, like, like thousands of, like, creatures and you've shown humanity doing this evil thing, maybe you want to balance it with some element of light at the end of the tunnel, maybe. But yeah, I thought that was an interesting choice. I generally think that this is one of the better ways they could have ended this show. I'm definitely mixed on, like, some of the things that were done. Particularly, I think it is just the human-fish hybrid thing. I think it is a bit like, what? Okay, that's what we're doing. Like, it makes sense that they would see Accord as a union between the two, so it makes sense. I do like the scene where they are offered the plan, like the sort of the reserve in the water, and they basically go, "We will accept these terms as long as you call it what it is." Us, I think they call it like a slaughtering ground or hunting ground, and then they show a picture of everyone hunting like the different aquakine species. So I thought all that stuff was really good. I think there's probably a couple of elements of this show that like haven't really been like explained or really delved into much further, for sure. And I kind of think as well that like a lot of the actual practical elements of what this would mean for the world kind of do just get undone as a result of most of the aquakine dying. Obviously, the stuff I found most interesting about this show was how does humanity coexist with these creatures, but obviously because it's Doctor Who and because it's still in that world, you can't really have that permanent change to the status quo, which I kind of expected, but I think it's a bit of a shame, because I almost think that would be more interesting if there was a permanent shift. Obviously, they still exist, just in a much smaller number now. I think Russell Tovey is an absolute standout in this. One thing I did really like is the focus on him and, like, the focus on how much of a mental toll this has taken, because, like, yeah, he's a normal guy. Like, in the space of a few days, he goes from being a normal guy to basically being told, there's a chance that you end up just in protected custody forever because, obviously you're so famous and so controversial that, like, you're going to have to basically be, monitored at all times and all this kind of stuff, which basically means that this normal guy can no longer have a normal life, and neither can his family. And I liked the exploration of that towards the beginning. Like I said, I think the first sort of 2/3 was, like, genuinely fantastic. Everything up until the death and the virus that spreads around Homo Aqua, I think is great. I think it is just some of the choices made towards the very end where I'm a bit like, don't know about that. I also love the detail as well of when the tank starts to burst, the Prime Minister is the first one to run out of the way. Why did the tank burst, though? Was there any indication that it was like unstable prior to that, or did they deliberately break it? Or what? I wasn't really sure what caused it to break. I thought maybe it would be a thing of, oh well, the Homo Aqua drown out like the humans as a retaliatory thing, but it wasn't that. It seemingly just happened on its own. But I did like that moment of obviously the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister obviously, whenever Salt is saying, oh, we're going to find out, he's looking obviously terrified because he knows his role of complicity in it. I did think all of that stuff was good, and I think it is accurate to how we would act. I think it's just a shame that some of that stuff fell to the wayside. And, like, I'll be honest, I think, for me, the romance stuff in this show is much less strong than the political thriller parts of this show. I could have done without the romance between Salt and Barclay, to be honest. Every time it goes to a bit of romance between those two or whatever, it just becomes a bit of a less interesting, slightly more cliched affair, in my opinion. I think, like, Barclay as this ambassador for the Earth, saying what, no others will say because of corporate interests, is much more interesting to me than what Barclay ends up kind of becoming in a sense, which is just, oh, but I really love Salt, what about Salt, what about Salt? Like, that's his only real concern at that point, rather than what he was in the first two, which was much more passionate about the Earth as well. And even in, like, the first episode, he's kind of saying, well, they killed us as well. So obviously, he sympathizes with Salt a lot, and obviously condemns the humans for what they did, but I kind of felt like, I don't know, I felt like Barclay lost something when the more of the romance got introduced, I think it maybe watered him down, pun not intended, slightly. But broadly, I still liked it, and I do like the deliberate, what I assume is a deliberate kind of paralleling of obviously Kate losing Ibrahim, but she allows Barclay to be with Salt because obviously that's his romantic partner. So I do get it from that perspective. You want a narrative foil in that sense. I just felt that the political thriller, kind of real world drama stuff was much more compelling than their relationship. I think it probably doesn't help that, like, the show is 5 episodes long, and we only properly get introduced to this relationship in like episode 3 or 4. Obviously, there's a moment in episode 2 where Salt's like, "Oh, I think you might be my favorite human," and he kind of chuckles, which kind of indicates that maybe there's a romantic element there. But it takes really until episode 4 and like episode 3 for that to really start to come through. Obviously, private meeting in episode 3, and then episode 4 they escape together and da da da. But I almost think this needed to be one more episode if you wanted to do the romance on top of that, because I kind of think that that ends up for me feeling like the weakest link in what is otherwise very thematically strong for the most part. Because I thought when they killed all the Homo Acra, I was like, oh god, this is actually really like good, really dramatic, and really Children of Earth-esque. But it's when it just becomes about, oh, but what about Salt? I'm a bit like, oh, but that's not as interesting to me. Do you know what I mean? But like, I feel like I'm being critical, and I am, but it's not because I didn't like it, because I did. I think as an ending, it's one of the better ways you could have ended it. I think for me, it's just, I would have liked a bit more of that focus on the political stuff in the sort of first 20, 25, 30 minutes, because that's the stuff that I really like. And the human toll it was taking on Barclay as a person, I really connected to. But when it just becomes about him finding Salt, I'm a bit like, but I've seen, a love story 1,000 times, like I've seen that story done before. And don't get me wrong, Russell Tovey and Gugu Mbatha Raw do sell it well. They sell the connection well, but I don't know, I found something much more interesting in all of the kind of diplomatic negotiations. And I like the bit with, towards the beginning with the original ambassador, where you've got him saying, oh, well, we can't do it in 5 years. He's like, you did it, you did it, you did this, you did it. And like, he's just not budging. Tide, who's the male Homo amphibian, is just not budging. And I also think it's quite harrowing when they're like, oh yeah, you've won, bask in your victory, and they're all kind of smirking at each other. I thought all that was really good, and it harkened back to what Children of Earth did, where it kind of said that humanity were the monsters. I thought all of that stuff was excellent. The romance stuff can take or leave. I think that's my main takeaway. Overall, though, because obviously I have been talking now for about 20 minutes, and I feel like I've said a lot without saying a lot. Maybe, I don't know. But overall, I did enjoy this series. I did, and I think you've got to bear in mind, this was a series that no one had any expectations for. And I think coming out of that, I enjoyed it. Again, I think it was not perfect in any way. And I do have some issues with some of the romantic aspects of it. But I think all the stuff with, like, humanity just wiping out, like, Homo Aqua, I feel like that's the only way you could deal with the universal implication, or the planetary implication of the Sea Devils existing, without it feeling super cheap, because Severance had been set up and all that kind of stuff. So I thought all that was fine. One thing I do want to mention is, obviously, as I mentioned before, the post-credits, where, obviously he says there's a story event that happens at the very end, and it's the most sensational scene ever, and I saw a lot of people being like, was that it? Like, I do get that. I get to an extent that he wanted to make a point about what the show was about, and obviously Kate just being over everything. I hope that if the show gets continued in this format, and it is with this team, that, like, Kate's mental breakdown actually does, like, feed into future stories, because I think it'd be kind of weird now if, like, future Doctor Who comes out, and then she's kind of just reset back to normal Kate. But yeah, this is not only the end of War Between, but the end of Disney-era Doctor Who. And it's much different to anything in the actual Disney era of Doctor Who. But I think for me, I could have done with less of the romance. That's my core takeaway. I think the dialogue generally picked up a bit in this, though. I will give it that. I didn't feel there was as many clunky lines in this as there was, particularly in episode 3 and 4, where I thought the dialogue did kind of fumble a little bit. And I think part of that is because, obviously, a lot of people have been saying now that, like, because of this show, Pete McTeague should take over as showrunner. But honestly, I felt that the dialogue and the character moments were stronger in this episode than in the previous two. So I think that strikes to the fact that I still think maybe RTD is the better character writer. Personally, I do notice a distinction between those two, which probably won't be a common take, but it is one that I have. Elsewhere, music. I thought music was very good. Lorne Balfe, Take a Bow. I love the soundtrack for this show. Did a very good job. Wasn't too intrusive, but was memorable. I will remember the main theme and all, all the little motifs and the sort of riffs on it. Thought that was all really good. Again, visually, Dylan Holmes Williams. This is the best looking piece of Doctor Who content ever. I think I'm safe in saying that. Like, it just looks fantastic. Like, the shots of all of the Homo Aqua with all the virus all over them, and they're all, like, floating on the top of the ocean. Great imagery. Loved all the directing. I think every actor in this, the main ones, particularly, obviously, Russell Tovey, Gemma Redgrave, and Gugu and Matha Raw, are absolutely acting their hearts out in this. I think overall, while it did fumble in places, this show, I think there were moments where the dialogue was a little bit clunky and some things are a little bit, like, sort of convenient. I think it's a compelling piece of television. It tells an important story and makes an important point. And I think it actually does something interesting with the Sea Devils, which, to be honest, it isn't very often done. So, yeah, I mean, I still enjoyed it. I wouldn't say I'm as raving about it as I was with, like, maybe the first two episodes. Like, obviously, I do think it is one of the best things in this era still. And I would also say that, for me personally, obviously, I am much more in favour of darker stuff now as a result of this. But I wouldn't say it's on the same level of Children of Earth. It's above Class, and it's above, like, the early Torchwood stuff. And, I mean, it's hard to really rank it next to Sarah Jane Adventures because they're so different tonally. But it's definitely a solid spin-off, and I'm glad we got it. But obviously, there are moments where I feel a bit of missed potential. But broadly, I liked it. And for something that, like, I had no expectations for, I came away rather content with that, I think. Again, by no means perfect, but I enjoyed it. And I think of all the endings he's written, it's probably the best of the three. Like, I think it would have been so cheap if they'd have done, ooh, and then the Master comes out, or ooh, and then the Doctor comes out and fixes it. Like, I think that would have just entirely cheapened the whole point of the story. So I'm glad they didn't do that. I'm going to stop rambling. Let me know what you guys think about The War Between the Land and the Sea, Episode 5, whatever it's called. What is it called? What is this episode called? The End of the War. Oh, that's nice and easy. What did you think of the episode? Let me know in the comments below. If you did enjoy, be sure to give it a like. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you later.